Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. It's October the 12th, and Charles is going to be talking about editing employee records, and that'll include adding a new employee and direct deposit and all kinds of other interesting items that maybe you weren't thinking about when you add an employee. Sometimes we forget certain details, and believe it or not, those details are really important. So, Charles, thank you so much for your ability to be so thoughtful when you do this training so that even I can understand it. So thank you very much. Would you like to take it away now?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Saundra, for that introduction. And yes, we're going to go into our demonstration site, and we're going to deal with the adding of a new employee, entering direct deposits, terminating, and issuing a manual check. Now, some of these items you're actually able to do from the home page here by clicking on adding an employee, editing an employee, or manual check. And before we go any further, I do want to mention that in our payroll parlance, a manual check is one that you are going to be calculating in our system, but we are not printing the check for you. This is a check that you need like that day, but you don't want to process an entire payroll for it. So you just calculate it in our system, and then you handwrite it on your side. And you are able to actually, from this, print up a statement for the employee so that they get the statement that is required, and they get the check. And then it just gets recorded on the next payroll. So that's the explanation for what a manual check is. If you're referring to a check that we print, we call those live checks. Now, you can do that from clicking on these buttons, but you can also find that in the employee section right here up at the top. So I'm going to click on it, and it's going to take us to the employee section. And so if we were going to add an employee, we go under employee task and click on add. Now here we have the different forms by tax form selection. We have W-2, we have the 1099 NEC, non-employment compensation, and we have other. This is the one where we select this option to add someone to the system that will not have any tax setup and produce no tax forms at the end of the year. With the 1099 NEC, we can print out your 1099 at the end of the year. Now, the two that are in the middle right here, the 1099M and the 1099R, we do not use. And the reason why is 1099M is no longer for non-employment compensation. It's no longer for where you hire a contractor to do a task and then they do it and this is their payment. It's for other things. It's miscellaneous is what the M is for. And 1099R is for retirement distributions. And in payroll, we generally don't do the distributions. We do the contributions. So normally what you would use is the W-2, and if you have a 1099, you can use this. Now, some clients that we have, they elect to have their accountant do their 1099s. That's fine. You are not required to do them in payroll, but you have the option, which means also that we can print their checks for you with the payroll. We can run reports with their information and so forth. So there's advantages to running it through here. So we select W-2, and then we click on the add button, but we see this modify new employee wizard. This is where you can go in and modify what you see when you're adding an employee. You can add certain fields, you can delete certain fields, you can make some of them required. That's useful when it comes to things like workers' comp, and we're actually running reports for you to figure out your premiums. You can make it required that you enter the workers' comp code when you are adding the employee. That can be essential for those kinds of reports. So we click on add, and this is where we would enter the information. And it's very basic information. It's what you would see when you're looking in the employee file itself. Is you get the social security number, the names, the addresses, and so forth. And then you can also put in their work email or personal email. That can become useful if you're using the employee self-service. So once you're done with this section, entering the information here, then you click on Department and Status, and that collapses that section and opens this one. And this is where you would select the departments, right? You can, depending upon your setup, this one is more complicated than the ones we've seen. Yours will usually just have a department, and it will usually have all employees, if that's your structure. If your structure is different, like it's a restaurant and you have waiters, cashiers, hostesses, kitchen staff, then you would select that department if you have it set up that way. We have this completely customizable so you can tell us which departments you want. We also would be putting in the hire date and then any other information that applies. We can put in things like employment type, right? Say, and we can edit this to be different types depending upon what you want. We usually have it as regular full-time, regular part-time, and then the two for temps, and sometimes even seasonal. But we can make it things like, say, journeyman or apprentice or whatnot. And this is where you could put in the workers' comp code if you require it. This right here is for being able to have our time clock service integrated. That's our time and attendance that we have. So that's where you can have it be integrated. And you notice it's automatically marked. We can set it up to be that way so you don't have to worry about selecting it each time. When you enter the information, you click on Pay Settings. And the one thing you don't do here is you don't put anything under the Pay Type section. This is because that is linked with our onboarding service. Onboarding service is the one where the employees can apply online, fill out W-4, their state form, their direct deposit, everything online. But that's linked here, so it's not for use. This pay type is not for use in this wizard itself. It's just we have it linked because both procedures are part of hiring. They deal with hiring a new employee. What you would put in is things like the pay details right here, where you would put in either their salary or their hourly rate. If you enter salary, you can also tell it to automatically pay that each payroll. So when you're in payroll, it's automatically checked off. You don't have to worry about it. And you can put in other information if it applies. If you have pay groups, if you have clock badge numbers, whatever, you can have that in here. Then after this section is done, you go to taxes, and this will be different depending upon what states, right? So if you have multiple states, right, then you would also have to be careful about the employment state as well. But how to enter the information is basically the same as what we've covered in other areas. These sections here follow the new W-4, where it asks for multiple. If you have multiple sources of income, it asks you for do a calculation to determine your dependent credit, and then other sources of income, other deductions, and additional withholding. So this is basically follows that. What you would have to do here is the step one. You would step 1C and step 2 is just the marital status, and if they have more than one job. And in the drop down, it even says right here, single or married filing separately one income, single or married filing separately multiple incomes. So we did change the verbiage here to make it easier to use the selection. So this is going to be the step 1 marital status and step 2 on the W-4 if they mark that box. And then for steps 3, 4A, 4B, and 4C, you just enter the dollar amounts that the employees listed. Now, we have had instances where people are still receiving ones where they say they put 2 for step 3. That's not a correct answer. It's supposed to be multiples of either 2,000 or 500 or a combination thereof. It's not going to be 2 or 3. So when they fill that out like that, you would need to go ahead and get in touch with them to correct it. And we have gone over in another presentation of these is the different types of state, the federal form and various state forms, the most local states to us. And then in California, it's very simple. Marital status, number of exemptions. If you're located in a different state, you would have something different. For Arizona, you have to select a percentage. When you're done with that, you're finally ready to do finish. And here is where on the left-hand side, you'll see where you would confirm the information that you entered. And then over here on the right is the invitation to register for employee self-service. And this is where if you entered their email, this is where it would be useful because there would be a little link where you can just go ahead and click on it, and it will email them the invitation to register for employee self-service as you're hiring them. or as you're entering them in the system. They should already be hired by this point. Then you click on Create Employee. When you click on Create Employee, the employee is now in the system, but you still have the option to add things like direct deposit and their PTO, their time off. And so that is basically the run through of how you would add an employee. Now, the next thing I'm going to go over is the direct deposit. And that we would go to payroll data and we hover over there and we go to direct deposit. Now, I had a training the other day where we talked about how a lot of our system is very intuitive as a graphical user interface. And there is that, but there are certain things that are not easy knowledge from just looking at this. I mean, looking at this, you would think, oh, I just hit add and I enter their information, yada, yada, yada. There are still certain things you would want to know. For instance, people can have more than one direct deposit. They can have $50 going to their savings and then the rest go to their checking. How do you enter multiple direct deposits? Well, you have them go by order of priority. 99 is always the last one. So that's always going to be their remaining net pay. When they only have one, it's their entire check. But in this case, let's say we put in a 1. That means that 1 goes first, 2 goes second, 3 goes third, 99 goes last. So let's say this is the savings account. And we go in and we put in the routing number, we put in the account number, right? We re-enter the account number, we designate it as savings because this is a savings account. And then we're going to mark on deposit entire check remaining net paid to this account. We're going to mark it yes. No, I'm sorry. We mark it no. And then we tell it that we're going to put in a $50. We tell it the amount is going to be flat amount. Now, if it was 50%, we would tell it it's a percentage. And it will look at this number here and determine that's 50%. You don't have to figure out what the decimal form of the percentage is. You don't have to put 0.5 or 0.25 or what have you. It will automatically look at that as a percentage and say 50%. So that's how you do the first. And then when you're working on the last one, the remaining net pay, that is when you say they put in the priority 99, put in the routing number, right? Put in the routing number, put in the account number, re-enter it. And then if this is a checking account, you would switch it back to checking and you would say yes. And that is how you would do that. Now, I've run into mostly where it's just been 2. If they have 3 direct deposits, then you'd have 1, 2, 99. If they had 4, you'd have 1, 2, 3, 99, and they always go in priority. And when you're doing those percentages, it's whatever is left over after the previous direct deposit. And what that means is that when a direct deposit is done, when it's a priority 1 and then you have a priority 2, whatever's left after you've taken care of the priority 1 is now the whole part of the pie. So you have to be careful when you're dealing with percentages, how much goes to each account. When you do them in order of priority, like for say the second priority, whatever is left over is now 100%. Okay, if that sounds difficult, you can always contact us when you're doing it. But again, most of the time, it's usually just 2. When it becomes like 3 and you're dealing with these percentages, give us a call and we can walk you through how to do it correctly. The last thing is this pre-note date. Now, pre-note date is a device by which you can keep a direct deposit from occurring until after a particular date has passed. That used to have the service back in the 90s when they didn't have this quick internet we do, and you had to wait a month for your direct deposit to go into effect while they confirmed the bank and all that kind of stuff. With everything being so quick now, that's not used as often, but it is still there in case it is used. So you have that there where it will say the direct deposit is not going to go into effect until after this date. Now, you do need to enter a date, so my best recommendation is to put the date of the first of the previous year. So in this case, it would be January 1st, 2022. And then the start date, you always want to put the date that you're entering the direct deposit. Why? Because it defaults to the next check date automatically. Well, what if you happen to have a special payroll run you need to do in between? this direct deposit will not be in effect because the start date hasn't arrived yet. So it's always a good idea to just change that to whatever date that you're putting it in. And that's everything about the direct deposit. The next thing that I have on my list here is, okay, I'm just going to hit cancel, so it doesn't ask me to cancel, is how to terminate an employee. For that, I'm going to go to the demographics. If you notice, I like to use these menus up at the top. So I select demographics underneath personal. And you can see that I transitioned. I'm still in the employee section, but I transferred from the payroll data to the personal, and I'm on demographics. And how to terminate an employee is right over here under employment status. And it's this field right here. And I would just click on it. Now it's select terminated. There is leave of absence, and we can add other types here. The idea is you do not want this person accidentally showing up in payroll and accidentally paying them when they don't receive it, because it's easier to make it correct before you do payroll than to try and correct it afterwards. So I click on terminated, and then I can put in the termination date. I can select the termination reason, but that's not required. The last day worked is not required either, but you may want to have that in here in case you want to create a special report to see it, or if you just want to have that information at hand. And then an effective date. This is what will determine when this change goes into effect. Not when they're terminated, but when this change goes into effect. And that's important because if you leave it on a future date, then it will lock the employment status, so you won't be able to change it. Okay? So it's a good idea. It's like whatever soonest is either today's date or the date of termination. So if the date of termination is in the past, that's what the effective date is. If the termination date is in the future, then you might just want to put today's date. You also have the option of blocking certain things here, like deductions, pay rates, things like that, what have you. But again, that's not required. And at this point, what you would click on is save at the bottom, but I'm not really terminating this person. So I hit cancel, and I just cancel any changes. And then the last thing is issuing a manual check. Now, we did see on the home page that you can issue a manual check, but you can also go under employment task and select the manual check right here. So we have different ways of doing it. Okay, so this here is under employee task, but also under the home page, you just click on manual check. And this is probably where you're going to be doing it the most, because you log in, this home page is just right there for you. Just like you might just add employee here the most. Okay. Now here, there's a couple of things. One is when you're here, you need to make sure you're on the right employee. So let's just go ahead and make it Raggedy Ann. And so once I'm here, I'm going to click on create over there on the right. And it thinks, now when it says delete, that means that I have created it, and the delete is actually the next action, right? So if I'm making an error, I just click on delete, and that deletes what I'm doing. So right here, we have the start, which has things like doing a net to gross value, blocking earnings or auto pays, tax frequencies. All of this is right here, but usually you go straight into the details. And this looks like the regular payroll entry grid, where you would select the earning code. The earning code, like, let's see, we have regular here. And then you'd put in the hours. And then that could be it. If that's all you're paying them, that could be it. You could hit save down here at the bottom. And then once it's done thinking about it, it shows you over here a summary of the information on the right. You can click on View Check Details to see it. Now, 9 times out of 10, that's usually what you're going to be doing, but there may be additional things you need to do, like going to deductions to see if they have any, right? It's like, oh, well, they're not going to take 401k out of this one, but I do need to take out the child support, the medical, or what have you. And you would mark them here. So let's just say child support, medical, and 125. Now, you don't have to hit save again because it will automatically calculate it over here if you see that. Now, and it does make a distinction between deductions and taxes, okay? I do run into that a lot where people talk about deductions. They're actually talking about taxes. You can also click on taxes right here and say, oh, we're not going to be withholding any federal income tax on this. So you would mark that here. And it asks you if you're sure, because these are usually required, but it's like you would just say yes if you're determined. But you do not block the state disability. That is required. You can block the state income if you wish. And so that blocks that out. That changes the tax amount over here. And then the last thing you would go to is save/print. This is where you can tell it what the check date's going to be. So you can sit here and say, this is going to be October 13th. You can put the period, 1st, 13th. And then you select the bank account, which will be, it's going to be, you're usually going to see one for your company, and it's going to either say primary account or client account. And you do have to select a check number. Now, if you don't have the check number, you can use 9999 like that, but you do need to put a check number in here, because if the system does not see a check number, it will print a check for you. You can also have the option of putting in a check memo, like a bonus check, right? So this could be this is the bonus or retroactive pay or what have you. Retro pay, whatever you want. And then to get the statement, you click on print and save manual checks. Now, if you hit save check, it will not print a statement. It will save it into the payroll. And that's another thing. We have not yet saved this into the payroll. It will not record unless we select one, either save check or print and save manual check. But I always recommend print and save manual check. And this is why. Because it gives me a warning, and I'm going to go say, okay, that will give me this check statement that's appearing right here. And we give it a minute. So that gives me the check statement. Now, the top part, that looks like an actual check, because some of our clients have what's called print back, where they print the checks on their end. So they could actually print this up on check stock. This part right here, all of this, when you're giving them something other than that, you'll want to cut off, because nowadays with the different apps that you have where you can take a photo of a check, you don't want to run the risk of them doing that and getting paid twice. So you would just basically keep all this down here, and that will be their check statement that you can hand to them while giving them a regular a check that you've written out yourself. Okay. And then the other thing about printing it there is if I go to reporting and I go to my completed reports, I have a copy right there. So that's why I would do that print, because if say you forgot to print out the statement or something, you have it right here. And we keep these here for 3 months. And that is everything that we had, unless there's any questions. Saundra, was there anything else you wanted us to go over for today?
I think you covered it really well, Charles. Thank you. One of the distinctions is a manual check. If it's a term check, there's a certain amount of time that you have to give an employee their final check. And so I want to make sure that everybody knows that. You can't wait until the next pay period when somebody is leaving and it's involuntary. If it's voluntary, then you can post-date that check they've given you 2 weeks notice. We know that if you're giving you notice, you're going to have their final check on the next pay period. And so that's different than when you're terming somebody, because there is a different rule for that.
Yes, and each state has a different set of rules, so you'll want to check with your state to see what the legal requirement is for how quickly you need to provide them with the termination check, the final check.
Right. And a lot of people working remotely, you need to make sure of that. So glad you pointed that out, Charles, because that's important to know. In fact, there's a button that you can click where it says work state versus the state where the taxes are. You want to take a look at the work state, making sure you have that correct. Like I live in Arizona, so my state income tax is a percentage versus in California where it's something else. So something to be clear about. And don't forget that your team is here at PayrollCentric to answer any questions that you might have. So please remember that we are here for you. You can call the main support line or send an email to support@payrollcentric.com. And if any of you have any questions other than that, please see that my email address is in the chat. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you found the information useful, and we are very, very pleased and thankful that you are part of our Payroll-Centric family. Goodbye for now.